really know how to vocalize how I feel, to be honest. Lots of emotions are flowing through me right now, as I'm sure many are with you. Chapter 51 is one of the most beloved by fans, and you can clearly see why. And it's my personal third favourite chapter from this entire arc. Kinema Citrus have once again proven to everyone in the industry that if you take the time and really care about the product you're trying to push out, you can truly make something wonderful. What I value heavily about this episode is in its writing and portrayal of these events through both its animation, voice acting, soundtrack, and one thing that actually really stuck out to me was its use of colour. The world building in this is next level, the emotions are off the charts, the revelations are fantastic, and above all else, look how precious my fucking wife is! Hello everyone, welcome to another Main Abyss Season 2 episode review. Today we'll be talking about episode 8, The Form the Wish Takes. Now, I just want to say that can we all agree just how lucky we've all been with this adaptation? I don't think I've seen a manga to anime adaptation as good as this ever before. Don't get me wrong, there are some great ones out there, but you just get so much more out of the anime. And that's not at all to discredit the source material, as it still stands as, in my incredibly personal and very biased opinion, as the best piece of fiction to date. But god dude, this anime, excuse the pun, but my god, we Main Abyss fans have been eating real good this season. I've made this joke twice in the commentary, but I don't care, it's my video. There is a lot to talk about in this episode, so let's just jump straight into the manga comparisons. So firstly, the episode actually starts with the remaining end content from chapter 47. This sequence in the manga essentially played as soon as Veiko was about to recount the entirety of the Ganja Corp's backstory, and transitions to Reg and Fapta's reunion. The advantage of this is that we get straight into the episode, and the end note is a lot more beautiful. The disadvantage, however, is that the anime onlys will never truly experience the stomach-wrenching feeling readers got when that chapter ended on that insane cliffhanger. The significance of that moment is definitely limited because of this narrative choice, but that being said, it comes down to personal taste, and I personally, in my objectively correct opinion that I refuse to debate, much prefer the impact that Veiko's dialogue left over the not-so-pretty self-mutilation sequence. I know, what an outlandish opinion to have. Now this entire episode is based on chapter 51, which, as stated, is one of the most beloved and longest chapters in the manga. I knew going into this episode that this would be a one-chapter episode, but that being said, we are really only behind by one chapter at the moment in terms of the anime. I'm guessing that with a 12-episode season, episode 12 will likely be a 40-minute episode, or the anime will have to hasten the pace of a few chapters later during the big battle sequence still to come. So as far as how this anime strays from chapter 1, well, I mean, there's an original shot where Veiko walks out of the room from Wazukin's cooking class, I guess, and another original shot where all the Ganja Corps are following Iremyui. And we also get some visual clarity on which of the Ganja Corps have been turned into the Narahade we still see today in the village, because that wasn't in the manga. Not gonna lie, my notes end here. So it appears the anime followed the manga to a T, which means that's the end of the manga comparison, I guess. Jesus, this is awkward. Well, I mean, I do have a lot to say regarding the actual anime adaptation of this chapter, so let's go through an anime recap and actually talk about this episode as a whole. Holy shit, it's an actual anime episode review now. So to recap, we reconvene with Reg who encounters Fapta after seeking out a piece of her value. She insinuates that if he keeps his promise from a long time ago, he can have any part of her he wants. He insists that whatever she needs him to do, he promises to see it through. She agrees to lend him a hand, and then quite literally lends him a hand. But little does he realize that what she wants is the eradication of the entire village, which in actuality means to liberate her mother and destroy all those who consumed her. Whether this is how Iremyui actually felt is up to interpretation. But do you remember when the interference unit mentioned that he can't stop Fapta? Really makes you think, doesn't it? After that exchange, we find ourselves back in the Ganja Corps backstory. Belaf insists that he doesn't want to eat the Iremyui baby suit, and begins to claw at the very thing that defines him, his eyes. Veiko, also understanding of how he feels, still insists that they need to eat. It's their only way to survive after all, despite how awful it is. But Belaf is too overcome by guilt. Wazukin appears and tries to reaffirm to Veiko that Belaf is fine as he's one of the three sages. He has Veiko accompany him to see Iremyui only to witness her transformation almost in full. She has lost the ability to speak coherently, but can still feel emotion. The newest baby is taken away from her for Wazukin to prepare for a meal, and she screams in response. While these babies are prone to dying within a few hours, Iremyui still cherishes them and agonizes for them. But the freshness of their meat is essential to the suppression of the mockwater symptoms. After Wazukin begins chopping up the not-so-vegan-friendly meal, Veiko reunites with Iremyui with a knife in hand. Veiko believes that having Idamui's wishes stolen from her every day and using her to solely save the Ganja Corp at this point is just far too cruel. About to commit a double suicide, Idamui stops her with an embrace, showcasing that despite what her body is turned into, she is still the Idamui we ventured on this adventure with. And it showcases that she still very much loves Veiko. Time passes and Idamui appears to have stopped crying. She briefly moans and Veiko investigates why, and finds a second cradle of desire inside her. The first one was fully absorbed to grant her previous wishes, but a new one was scouted out by Wazukin and given to Idamui. Whether he intended to have her use this egg at the benefit of the Ganja Corp, or because his prophecy deemed it so, or simply because he wanted to give her the chance to choose, is left to interpretation. She then begins to traverse to an empty spot inside the abyss. This empty place is the crater that surrounds the village of Iraburu, or should I say, Idamui herself. Idamui begins to feed on the creatures of the skies to regain some of her energy, and Belaf has a meltdown. After being a genuinely positive person all this time, he is overcome by the guilt that came with prolonging his own life by taking away what is truly precious to Idamui. For compensation, he offers his entire being to Idamui, no matter what form that may take. But Idamui instead turns him into a Narahade, the same one we see inhabiting her village to this day. Now keep in mind, every Narahade that give themselves up to the village, their hollow form is symbolic of their desires. I can't talk too much about this due to spoilers, but we will definitely revisit this idea in a later episode. Just keep that principle in mind when watching this series. It's a small detail that's often overlooked, but if you're like me and love character analyzing, then you'll want to keep that in mind. It just adds so much flair and depth to the characters. After the members of the Ganja begin to offer themselves up to Idamui, Wazukin confronts Veiko about what she wants to do. Driven by grief of the situation, and the desire to maintain her conception of Idamui when she was a beautiful smiling child, she attempts to take her own life, only to be interrupted by Best Boy Wazukin, who happens to have used a Cradle of Desire on himself. After awakening from a concussion, Veiko finds herself deep in the heart of the village known as Dogapu to the villagers today. Wazukin arrives in a fresh new look and converses with Veiko. He mentions that he used the Cradle of Desire despite its danger solely because he felt as a leader, he must do everything he can to ensure the hope of the journey still remains. He bids Veiko farewell and says that this place belongs to her. This essentially is the soul of Idamui. Using the signals in the village, Veiko can see Idamui's true emotions. She learns that on the surface of the village, Idamui had been planning something with the second Cradle of Desire all this time. Her second Cradle of Desire, in its entirety, was used to birth a being that inherits all of her desires. The second Cradle of Desire was used to birth her final child. This being is now known today as the Narahade Princess, Fapta. Fapta, consumed by her mother's rage, destroys the interference units, but is unable to enter the village to destroy everyone within it. The membrane of the village prevents her from doing so she ventures out in hopes of one day finding a solution to this problem so that she can liberate her mother and find purpose in her own life someday. We reconvene with Veiko, who has given herself the task of watching over the village and naming all the dead children of Idamui. She uses all this time to comfort the children here through both lullabies, stories, and embrace. God, I love this woman so fucking much, dude. We arrive back at the present day, and Veiko informs the group that there really isn't a way to talk Fuputa out of this, as her desire is the same as her mother's. She was born to fulfill that purpose and won't stop at anything until it's done. And finally, Riko asks Veiko what it is that she wants to do. She offers a very sincere smile and simply says, "I just don't want to forget her." And then the episode ends. Alright, so anime review time. Chapter 51 is a beloved chapter by manga readers, and I won't lie, it's definitely one of my favourite chapters in this entire manga. The anime definitely did its source material justice, but that being said, I don't think it quite hit the mark like I had personally hoped. Now put your pitchforks down, y'all, just hear me out, okay? I swear, I did love this episode. Don't get me wrong, I still say the anime is the more favourable experience of the two. I can happily say I prefer the anime episode overall compared to the chapter, but only by a little bit. It felt like somehow the manga managed to still remain almost toe-to-toe with this adaptation, which, if I'm honest, is a little shocking considering how much more advantage the anime medium has over the manga medium. The music was fantastic overall. I liked the use of the song Made in Abyss during the last scene, and the beautiful new tracks were also fantastic. The animation was nice and clean, the colour work was outstanding. I adored the use of blue, making these sequences far more gloomy, and then the clever use of gold. It was a subtle but very clever decision. Also, Veiko's voice acting was fantastic this episode, but something just felt missing. I don't really know how to describe it, but when you're reading these pages one after another at your own pace, each page turn feels like it's snowballing, and finally, when it all hits at once. The level of pain and sorrow that comes with this plotline is just betterly expressed in the manga. The anime, while paced fine overall, still could have let certain scenes breathe a little more. Factor's emergent sequence just felt a lot more bigger, more alive, and far more intense in the manga. And Veiko's beautiful ending note just has a lot more emotional weight to it in the manga compared to the anime. Like, take this scream as an example. It's like night and day, if I'm honest. While I'm sure animating comes with its own difficulties, it is still pretty easy to see which of these two would draw viewers in more. I think the anime, as good as it was, didn't quite reach the mark most of us manga readers were expecting, but to be perfectly honest, that doesn't matter too much. While it may not have gone above and beyond, I still feel like it did a pretty phenomenal job overall. Again, I do think the anime is still the overall better experience of the two, but I do want to point out how fantastic Akihito's vision is, even by himself. An example being in that final page with Veiko, the anime kind of cuts her off at a mid-shot, doesn't really let you experience her full bodily emotions. And to be honest, that body language is important. Veiko is the sort of person who's very closed in, but in that last page she just seems open and honest with herself. But hey, with the criticisms out the way, let's talk about what was fantastic about this episode, as well as some interesting little tidbits I want to talk about. So firstly, the sequence with Veiko and Irem, in particular the double suicide sequence. This, and I will happily admit it, got me incredibly choked up. This entire scene was so much more impactful in the anime. Weirdly enough, for what's left of Irem at this point, she still manages to show so much expression despite having very little facial features. And Veiko's vocal performance was just fantastic. It gave me goosebumps throughout. This entire scene just hit so much heavier in this adaptation, man. I'm getting misty-eyed thinking about it. Sorry, the little goblin under my desk is cutting onions. Let me just set him straight real quick. Oi, goblin! Quit cutting onions! Sorry, boss. Another thing that I really liked about this episode was how they handled Belaf's descent into madness. I don't think any character in the series has showcased how dire the situation truly is better than him. The man who was once so well composed and charming has now fallen into the deepest and darkest corners of his mind, and I think the anime really expressed that. You can't help but feel bad for a man, like the turmoil was painted all over his face. And speaking of turmoil, I again had to talk about the best character out of this arc, Wazukin. One thing that I think the anime conveyed better than the manga did was just how exhausted this man truly is. He is quite literally carrying the team through the remainder of this operation, and doing so with the fakest and transparent smile. I love that the anime conveys just how hopeless even he is during all of this. While everyone truly believes he is possessed by the divine, I love that he himself simply says he's just someone who has to do everything he can. Never confirming that his prophecies belong to any greater being. It's so cleverly written, man. I fucking love Wazukin, dude. So characters aside, let's talk a little on some tidbits, shall we? I want to also talk about the Cradle of Desire itself. Now that the Ganja backstory is finalized, we can properly analyze how it's used. First and foremost, the way in which it works is still up to interpretation, but from my understanding after looking back over these chapters and rereading this entire arc again, I believe the relic isn't limited to one wish, but over time, when it fully infuses with its user, it cannot grant any new wishes. The first Cradle of Desire was used to fill various different ones all at once. To break this down, let's go through Iremui's wishes. Iremui didn't want to be outcast, so because of her abandonment issues when labelled as a sacrifice from her tribe, because she was unable to give birth, she was now able to produce children. These children also look like deformed versions of hermit delvers. They likely look like this because she valued her pet hermit delver, and once it was consumed, she cried and agonized over it, which just mirrors the way these children die very quickly and Iremui agonizes over them. Whether she wanted merely a pet or to simply be able to give love to something is up to interpretation. Iremui also wanted to save the people who gave her a new home, hence why she was able to create beings that when consumed, relieves the mockwater symptoms. She wanted to be with Veiko forever, which is also why she took on a form that enabled her to do so in the end. But after her children are constantly taken away from her, and she is essentially left to despair for the greater good of the corpse, her rage builds up, and when given a second Cradle of Desire, her wishes are now full of anger and despair, and that being all she could think about, the egg over time becomes her longing to venture, longing to scream, and longing to be set free. I just think Akihito is a clever writer, man. Like, he presents all these ideas very vaguely, but gives you so much room to theory craft, it's insane. Another interesting detail is that by the end of this episode, we now have full clarity on what the Black Moss actually is. And just like in proper Maiden Abyss fashion, it's dead children. We know for a fact that these are the souls of the children Iremui had that quickly died due to not having the right organs. What is interesting to think about though is that while we know what decides the value of things is dependent on the soul of those who value something, what initiates that balancing, however, are the very subjects that were unfairly taken away from the village's arms. I love that duality. It's a clever but upsetting realization. If any being knows what it's like to have their values stripped of them, it's the children who are born into the abyss, only to die moments later, completely robbed of life. Another small tidbit I want to bring up is Nakahito's clever writing. If you can recall to episode 5 of this new season, in particular when Riko and Mugi are talking about how the language of the village is very unique in that certain words can mean various different things, in particular how the word Uraburu has 3 different meanings. 50% of the time it usually means village, 40% of the time means cradle, and 10% of the time it literally means mother. I love that both the anime and manga had some emphasis on this. It basically gave so many hints on the answer a long time ago, which allowed people to kind of theory craft as to the village's origins in some way or another. The manga didn't exactly have this flexibility, as you don't know anything about Edem Yui until much later on in the story, whilst the anime introduced her almost immediately in the first episode, and slowly but surely sprinkled the ganja story throughout. I just think it was a really clever way to adapt this idea. It makes theory crafting a lot more easier and allows anime onlys to feel really included in the story. Honestly, I think this was a great episode. While I do have my gripes, I do think this episode did the source material the justice it truly deserves. I had just hoped it would have gone a little harder considering how important a chapter it is. That being said, bloody good job everyone involved. Ladies and gentlemen, that now concludes the Ganja Corp backstory. I would say that if this were a stage play, all the warm-up prep stuff is done. The stage is set, the lights are on, the props are ready, and now it's time for the performance. What makes this arc truly spectacular is soon to come, but I'm happy to say that the seats are already nice and warm. And believe me, there's still plenty of beauty and pain to come. Hey, thank you all for making me a part of your day. Hope you enjoyed your time, and if you're still watching, I just want to say, you're one of the real ones and I appreciate your support. I'll be uploading another video someday soon recounting the events that led up to my fateful encounter with Mr. Kevin Penkin himself, so be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can watch as I literally just humble brag for about 7 minutes about how good my life is. I shall bid you all a farewell. I'll see you all next week, even deeper in the abyss.